So to continue then with Heidegger's theory of interpretation, Auslegung, there is this a priori aspect to interpretation such that we have, he has Vorhaving, Vorhaben, and then also Foresight, Vorsicht, and for conception. And so if I take, let's say we take a sociologist and an economist, and we say that the two of them share a broad understanding of humanity. That's the Vorhaving that they have prior to specific applications. They share this broad understanding of humanity. But let's say with regard to the sociologist and the economist, the sociologist is only going to study the sociological aspects of the human being, not the economic aspects. And so that's in his foresight. The foresight is what's in his target view that he's going to study before he studies it. And he's got particular sets of concepts, his four conceptions that he's going to use, such as power and cooperation and conflict, that are going to make sense out of the field of sociology that he's going to study. So it's never the case in Heidegger that interpretation is that we're entirely clueless. There's always a certain bias. There's always a certain amount of pre-interpretation going on that we bring to any system that we study, and this goes for science as well as for the humanities for Heidegger. It's not just for the humanities, it's also for the sciences. It's an act of interpretation. This, of course, this chapter will be the jumping off point for Gadamer when he writes Truth and Method, coming out of this hermeneutic idea of Heidegger, that what we always have is interpretation. And meaning, Sinn in German, meaning is never something that is just found out in the world of things in nature that are in the state of presence at hand. They have no meaning except for the meaning that Dasein understands them as having, except for whatever meaning that Dasein either successfully understands them to have or fails to understand them to have. Dasein brings meaning with it, just like Kant, we saw with Kant bringing space and time. The subject brings space and time with him to the world to make sense out of it. So for Heidegger, Dasein brings meaning with it to its understanding of the world of nature, of present in hand. And notice that the way that present is the way that nature as a present at hand mode is used there is very similar to Lacan's idea of the real, that which is outside of symbol systems and which is capable of rupturing them and crashing into them and breaking them apart. And Heidegger even has a passage in here where he talks about nature, natural events, for instance, can break in upon us and destroy us. And so there's a fundamental meaninglessness about the world of nature in its present in hand mode. Meaning is always a function of Dasein, and Dasein brings that meaning to the world. That is the core of Heidegger's theory of interpretation, and I think I'll stop there at that point, and then tomorrow we'll continue with this chapter, moving into assertion as a derivative mode of interpretation, and then on from there into language. He's moving directly. You can see the architecture of what he's doing. He's moving into language. He starts with being in the world, and then moves into the thrownness, mood, Stimmung, Geworfenheit, and then moves from that into understanding. Understanding as the counter response of the human to his passive thrownness. The understanding in the form of Entwerfen and world projection is the human response to the fall, basically, his thrownness. And then from there into his theory of interpretation as pre-ontological understanding, and then onward from there into assertion, and then on into language. So we'll move into that next.